Jonathan Lee Riches Investigates. I am covering the Moscow, Idaho Bryan Kohberger case. I want to share some new information with everyone regarding the interrogation of Bryan Kohberger by the Moscow PD. Yes, Bryan Kohberger, it looks like, was interrogated by Officer Brett Payne. I say this because there has been a recent filing on the court document with his case, and Ann Taylor, his public defender, filed a motion to compel, and she asked for records, discovery records, and notes and recordings that she has not yet received regarding the Bryan Kohberger case. I'm going to share this particular one right here.
So Ann Taylor, Bryan Kohberger's defense attorney, filed a recent motion to compel, and this is what she is asking for in this motion to compel. Mr. Kohberger requests an order for the state to disclose the following items included in the defendant's first supplemental request for discovery. Request number 119, all notes, recordings from all the officers from the Moscow Police Department. As of May 4th, 2023, counsel for Mr. Kohberger has not received recordings and notes from the interrogation of Mr. Kohberger by Moscow Police Detective Payne. That would be Brett Payne. Brett Payne. She has not received recordings and notes from the interrogation of Mr. Kohberger by MPD Detective Payne.
So she was seeking all notes and recordings of the interrogation of Bryan Kohberger by Officer Brett Payne. That is very interesting to me. Why is it interesting to me? Well, because Bryan Kohberger was interrogated. I never saw anything prior to seen anything that shown that Bryan Kohberger was interrogated by police. So she is acknowledging in this motion that Bryan Kohberger was in fact interrogated by Officer Brett Payne. Officer Brett Payne looks like he's like the lead detective in this case, because he's the one that filed the affidavit of probable cause for Bryan Kohberger's arrest. But where was Bryan Kohberger interrogated? Where was he interrogated? And when? When was he interrogated? Did Officer Brett Payne go out to Pennsylvania and interrogate Bryan Kohberger while he was in the Monroe County Jail, or, at some location in Pennsylvania? Did Brett Payne follow the plane to Pennsylvania to pick Bryan Kohberger up, to extradite Bryan Kohberger back and interrogate Bryan Kohberger on the plane? Or did Officer Brett Payne interrogate Bryan Kohberger when he got back to Moscow, Idaho, after being extradited, after Bryan Kohberger was extradited from Pennsylvania, and somewhere, whether that's at the Lake County Jail or the Moscow PD, Bryan Kohberger was interrogated? It looks like he was interrogated. Let me give you a little bit of information about the police interrogation process. Check this out.
So this is an article regarding police interrogation. What should I expect during a police interrogation? Police officers employ various and clever tactics to gather confessions from suspects they detain on suspicion of criminal misconduct. When the police aim to initiate interrogations, interrogation targets need to know what to expect and how to protect their rights. In any police interview concerning a crime, there are two essential points to remember. First, police design interrogations to obtain admissions and confessions. The accusatory interrogation is in effect an exercise in criminal justice. Second, the best self-protection, even if the target of the interrogation has done nothing wrong, is never to make a statement to police other than self-identification without first consulting a lawyer, because police use many diverse tactics to get confessions. The best way to avoid saying anything incriminating is to say nothing at all, except that you wish to make no statement, but to talk to a criminal defense attorney. The read technique. When police officers suspect someone of a crime, they often use the read interrogation technique, first developed in the 1940s. The term read technique is now a registered trademark of the firm John Reed and Associates, which offers training courses to law enforcement agencies. This sort of interrogation, often seen in movies and on television, takes place in a dingy room with one officer playing the friendly, sympathetic good cop and another the hostile bad cop. In police procedural dramas, the interrogation ends with either a tearful confession or an intervention by a defense attorney who shuts it down. In reality, the Reed technique is very effective at extracting confessions, and for the reason has been in use for over half a century. Using this technique, police rely on three methods to lead suspects to believe that confessing to crimes, whether guilty of them or not, is their best interest. Isolation. Officers isolate suspects from their family and friends to make them feel alone and defenseless. The idea of isolation led to the use of windowless interrogation rooms. Maximization. In the interrogation room, the first officer states that the suspect is guilty and that everyone knows it. The suspect too. The officer next offers a theory of the crime, sometimes supported by some evidence, sometimes fabricated with details that the suspect later can parrot back to the officer. The officer ignores or refutes any claims of innocence. The bad cop conducts this part of the interview. The cop who knows that the suspect is lying, that the suspect did it, and that the suspect wastes everyone's time with protests of innocence. Minimization. Finally, after the first officer makes clear to the suspect that all claims of innocence are useless, the process moves on to the good cops part of the interview. The second police officer tells the suspect that everyone will understand why the suspect did it. Wouldn't the suspect feel relieved after a true confession? If only the suspect confesses, good things will happen, a lesser charge and a chance to go home. If not, the suspect may remain in custody indefinitely. So, it talks about informal questioning, talks about lying, police tactics, and false confessions. This is a law firm sharing the tactics, but here, isolation, maximization, and minimization seems like the key factors here on this good cop, bad cop interrogation technique. Let me know what you think.
But it's interesting because Bryan Kohberger was interrogated. He can invoke his Miranda rights and refuse interrogation. He could say, hey, I'm not talking. They have to read your Miranda rights. And he can actually invoke it, Bryan Kohberger, and refuse an interrogation right offhand. Say, nope, no interrogation whatsoever.
When a suspect first gets arrested or interrogated, the officer will tell the suspect, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you can say and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. At that point, you could decide to talk to them, or you can invoke your Miranda rights. Invoking your Miranda rights. If the individual states that he or she wants an attorney, the interrogation must cease until an attorney is present. At the time, the individual must have an opportunity to confer with the attorney and to have him or her present during any subsequent questioning. Miranda rights.
Doesn't look like Bryan Kohberger invoked his Miranda rights. Now, it's interesting. Was Ann Taylor present? Did they wait to Bryan Kohberger got back to Idaho, and then Ann Taylor's already appointed to Bryan Kohberger, and then Ann Taylor with Bryan Kohberger sat in a room where Officer Payne interrogated Bryan Kohberger? That could be interesting. That could be true. But you would think she would also record it on her end. She's saying there's a recording out there. I would love to hear and see, one, what Bryan Kohberger said, his body language, his tone, what Payne was asking him. Hopefully that information comes out. But as of right now, Bryan Kohberger his defense hasn't received this video, this purported video that's out there. The way she's saying it in the discovery request makes me think it exists, because she asked it in the first supplemental request for discovery back in February, and she's filing a motion to compel because it has not been given to her. Prosecutor back then should have said, hey, this does not exist. So to me, it seems like it does exist. It does exist. So a lot of fascinating things. And, it would be interesting to see the setting where Bryan Kohberger was interrogated too. And then was he interrogated after Ann Taylor was appointed? Ann Taylor was appointed, not necessarily sure when exactly Ann Taylor was appointed, because she was at that Moscow home taking pictures before that, January 5th, I think around January 5th, where she was officially put on. his case. Was Bryan Kohberger, did Ann Taylor say, you don't interrogate my client when she was appointed on, and then they interrogated him anyway? That sometimes happens. And a lot of times, believe it or not, knowing my experience in the judicial system, statements, when defendants give statements to police, that's, we always talk about DNA evidence to convict an individual, but the statements that people, inmates and defendants give to police is also like the nail in the coffin too. It is advised, most attorneys tell you, do not talk to police under any circumstances whatsoever. So a lot of times the statements, whether you confess or not in that statement, whatever you say, the officer is going to come to the stand during, the later stages of the case, preliminary hearing, or if the case goes to trial, and share with the jury or the judge what you told the police. So a lot of times statements nail people too, because discrepancies and untruths, and then they'll say, you said this and this is not true, regardless if they confessed or not. And if they confess, they're buried, because usually the confession is like a conviction right off the rip, though there is some people that falsely confess, and the innocent project claims, but that's another story. Subscribe to my channel, hit the notification button. The interrogation, we know now that Bryan Kohberger was interrogated by Brett Payne. And then she's also asking for notes from Officer Pete, all Moscow officers. So what's going on here, people? We'll talk soon. Everyone stay tuned.